What are some examples of comparative advantage in the United States? In this video, I want to discuss some areas where the U.S. is a big exporter or a big importer. Compared to the rest of the world, the United States is a very rich country. Wages are high, and so is worker productivity. We tend to be very good at producing goods that are technologically very complicated, but we're relatively less effective at making very simple goods that rely mostly on labor. We can see that show up when we look at the goods that we tend to export and import. One example is aircrafts and spacecrafts. It doesn't get more technologically complicated than huge machines that can fly hundreds of passengers across the world, or that can bring a satellite into orbit. And it turns out that the U.S. is the largest exporter of aircrafts and spacecrafts in the world. We export about $130 billion worth per year. But how do you make aircraft? You need basic metals. Metal's not as technologically complicated as aircrafts. It involves mining and some refining, but it's mostly labor intensive. The U.S. is the largest importer of steel in the world. We bring in 30.3 million tons of steel each year. We make some at home too, but on net, we're the largest importer. The steel and aircraft example shows comparative advantage in practice. We do have the raw materials to make steel in the U.S. and to make plenty of it, but so do other countries like China, which also have lower wages. China is the largest net exporter of steel, sending out 46.6 million tons per year. What the U.S. has, but China doesn't, is a highly educated workforce that can design and build complicated machines. As a result, we import steel and export airplanes. China exports steel and imports airplanes. But just because we have a comparative advantage in aircraft today doesn't mean it will last. In fact, the U.S. used to be the single largest steel exporter in the world for most of the 20th century. In 1950, the U.S. was dominant and would have been hard to predict China's ascent 50 years later. This may sound like something bad happened. After all, the U.S. used to be the leader, but now it's not. But such changes aren't necessarily a bad thing. Comparative advantage is going to change in countries over time, and everyone is better off if they specialize. Though the U.S. is no longer the leader in steel production, other industries grew in its wake. If you work for a steel company in the U.S., and you got hit hard by the change. But if you work in aircraft, the change was good for you. Some people will be harder hit than others in the U.S., but this is a natural outgrowth of the free market that will leave society better off as a whole. We'll learn about how more in the next lecture.